yeah, we'll get started here. The purpose of this work session is to talk about the ARPA fundings that we have, and there's a loose agenda that was put together with Debbie's help, and it just pretty simple. It's Jody's going to give us a brief rundown on the ARPA fund balance and possibly some of the ideas or things that we could spend the money on or do with it. Then we're going to have Nels Andreessen. He'll speak to us. He's the executive director of the Alaska Municipal League. He'll give us an overview of some of his ideas and some of the things he's seen about it. And then we'll hear from Joni Johnston and Katie Homeland. And then Phil Hofstetter and Erica Painter will discuss upcoming needs of the Petersburg Medical Center and the school district. And then we'll have maybe some assembly discussion items if we need or if we want to. So I guess we'll start with there, and I guess we'll go to Jody. Hi, Jody.
Sure. Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Just a broad overview. The Department of Treasury's purpose of allocating $350 billion in recovery funds, state and local and tribal governments, was to help ensure that governments have the resources to fight the pandemic and support families and businesses struggling with its impacts, maintain vital public services, and also to build a strong recovery by making investments that support long-term growth and opportunity. So the total amount of ARPA funds that the borough was awarded was $634,000 change. We received half of those funds last May, and we'll receive the other half this upcoming May. The funds must be obligated by December 31st, 2004, but must be completely spent by December 31st, 2026. We've only obligated so far $20,000 of these funds, which was for the assisted living project. Changes have been made to this program from when it first started last spring. This winter, the Treasury published the final rule, which offers a more broader flexibility and simplicity for reporting and for spending. With Treasury's final rule, recipients can now consider up to 10 million as revenue loss. What this means is that any municipality that received less than $10 million can use these funds for any government service they choose. So we're talking about services that are traditionally provided by governments. This includes construction of roads and other infrastructure, provision of public safety and other services, and health and educational services. So for time's sake, I'll just cover what the funds can't be spent on. We can't spend these funds for debt service payments or replenishment of a rainy day fund. We can't use it to satisfy a settlement or judgment, nor can we use these funds to pay down a pension fund liability. We also cannot spend the funds on anything that would conflict with COVID-19 mitigation efforts. And is there any questions right now?
Yeah, Jody, I couldn't quite hear you. You said we can't spend this on anything dealing with COVID mitigation measures?
That would conflict with COVID.
Conflict, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Not real formal work sessions. They're all pretty loose. So if anybody has any questions, just speak up. Okay. And Jody did provide us several, I guess, a couple months ago about, I think it's a 4-page document about what could be used for what we could spend this money on. So I think all the assembly has it, and it's pretty inclusive about what can and what cannot be used. So we have that. Yeah. Thanks, Jody.
It's pretty broad. It's pretty broad. And NACO also has a good webinar, a 1-hour video that you can watch too if you're interested with questions and answers. So, yep.
Could you elaborate NACO? I didn't know that term or that.
Oh, maybe Neil can help me out with this.
You can even, if you spell the acronym, I can probably Google it.
National Association of Counties.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was a good intro for you, Nils.
Yeah, way to go.
Yeah, with further ado, I guess we'll turn it over to you, Nils.
All right. Thanks, everybody. And thanks, Jody, too, for that introduction to the ARPA funds. I think that there's a few things that I want to hit on and talk a little bit about our understanding of where things are at with ARPA, maybe a little bit about how other communities are approaching this, how the state's approaching this, and then maybe any questions you might have. I'm happy to try to address them. Um, I think for ARPA, as Jody said, you've got already your first tranche of funding that's come in for you as a county. There's these county allocations. There's other ARPA funds that have that are out there. Some went to NEUs, non-entitlement unit cities, and then also some went additionally to cities in the unorganized borough as their county allocation. So there's at least 3 rounds of different types of ARPA funding out there, and those don't matter so much to you. The funds that you do have are those CISL FERF, the Coronavirus State and Local Relief Federal Funding. There's also the Capital Projects Fund. Jody, did you mention the CPF funds, and did those go to counties too? Did you?
I did not mention that. No, I haven't seen that.
And it might have, I'll check on that. But I know the state received its portion of CPF, Coronavirus Project funds, that's out there. The other that still took, the other ARPA funds that are still out there are, there's public funds, public lands funds that will go out to counties. I think there's not a formula yet, but it's between $500,000 and $700,000 that would go to Petersburg each of the next couple years. Just Treasury's behind in getting that out. But all of it together means that you've got a lot of questions in front of you as to how to make the most of those funds. And Jody went through what's an allowable expenditure, what's not. The fact that the final rule allows for up to $10 million to be spent for basically not unrestricted, but for government services is really a relief. It means that you don't have to do that calculation on your own. It means that you don't have to work through all the federal guidance on allowable expenditures. And ultimately you get to look at, as long as things don't conflict with the guidance that's out there, you can use those funds in ways that really improve the living conditions, economy of folks in Petersburg. So I don't have to go through a long list of here's what's not eligible and here's what is, right? So that's nice. Even before the final rule, I think that most recipients at the local level had planned on using most of their funds for as lost revenue replacement. Mostly because that's not what CARES Act funding was for, and it wasn't an allowed use of CARES Act funds. So a lot of communities, the majority of CARES Act funds went out as individual and business grants by local governments. So it's very different in thinking about CARES Act versus ARPA, because ARPA with the lost revenue replacement has really meant that this is for governments to think about how do we support government services and rebuild and replace all the things that we lost during the last 2 years. And that's how most other local governments are approaching this. So that's either a straight across, backfilling budgets that had been reduced, that different funds had been taken from to make do over the last 2 years. I mostly see ARPA funds being used for one-time expenditures in any of the next couple fiscal years. So things like capital projects, deferred maintenance, those are both kind of high on the list for a lot of local governments. Basically things that you don't want to replace your current funding with these ARPA funds for, because 2 years on, you're going to have to find the general fund revenue to fill that obligation. So most are thinking about it in terms of one-time expenditures, or just kind of making themselves whole to replenish revenues. I've seen some local governments set up relief programs for businesses, nonprofits. A lot of that could be related to housing, could be related to food security, childcare, help with utility payments. All of those things were done during CARES Act, but are also eligible under ARPA and are still needed in communities who are still recovering. So those are programs that are worth considering if you haven't thought along those lines. But it is this is relief, right? It's very specific to how do we help our communities bounce back. And with CARES Act, it was getting funds into the hands of those who needed it most in our community, those most vulnerable, those businesses most impacted. With ARPA, it's about what are those community institutions and programs and the infrastructure that will help us rebound. And that relief is very different than things like the infrastructure package that just passed, which isn't about relief at all. It's about addressing the infrastructure deficit, making investments into communities, and it's not so much tied to the pandemic and emergency response as it is to kind of future growth and needs of a community, and including underfunding of infrastructure for so long. So those are the ways to think about these different levels or different types of federal investment. ARPA is still about relief, and in whatever form it applies to your community. So that would be, I guess, my review or introduction. I don't know that I went too specific, but I'm happy to answer questions if you think it's helpful as you're considering something. I can say whether others are talking about that too, or how you might otherwise think about it.
Thanks, Nils. You mentioned the public lands fund. What's covered there?
Nobody knows. I think it will be fairly unrestricted. It wasn't tied to, it didn't have the same type of guidance or anything as that the final rule had, or the CISL-FERF dollars have. It's really about supporting counties, and in Alaska that includes, or that's boroughs, but also our census areas, making sure that these public lands, because they have public lands who probably saw decreased visitors during that time, and that they've got obligations in those public lands, that I think it's for not lost revenue replacement, but it's for general government services. It also wasn't very clearly defined in the law about how those funds should be distributed. So Treasury is still working through what formulas are going to be useful for that.
Bob, are you out there?
Yeah, I am. Nels, I got a question for you related to the ARPA funds that the state received. What are you hearing on the state level about distribution of other funds back to the boroughs and to the municipalities?
You don't get any. So the ARPA funds. So with CARES Act, local governments receive 45% of the state's allocation. Those didn't go directly to most local governments. ARPA went directly to cities and counties. So the state's not sharing any of it. It's 1.12 billion is entirely for the state. The only caveat to that is that the legislature included in last year's budget $50 million to help local governments that were significantly impacted. Their revenues were significantly impacted. So there's a grant program that some applied for. They had to meet a lost revenue provision, and not everyone does. So those funds may start flowing here in the next month or so, but otherwise the state can easily count its $1 billion as lost revenue, and the budget proposal for this year is to use that entirely for its own government services. So right now the state's ARPA funds will replace $375 million in its current budget, or its proposed budget, to offset general fund use.
Did the state, at the state level, have they now looked at using those funds to offset, to make other funds available to the municipalities? Have you heard anything along those lines?
They won't do that in their they've already done that in their last year's budget. They use that to offset some of the shared fish tax revenues. So I think some community and the CPV revenues, I think they kind of built back for FY20 levels or 19 levels. And so folks should have received a double allocation for those two programs. But there's nothing else that the state is using their ARPA funds for to free up money for local governments.
Yeah, I had a question on the public lands money. When would we get it? If, or just, I know you don't know, but maybe you have an idea. And how are they going to base it upon how much public land is in each borough, or what sort of formula are they looking at?
Yeah, sometime in this fiscal year.
Okay, that's specific.
Federal fiscal year, so it makes it even worse. I would assume in the next 3 months they try to figure out. They had to. I mean, I think they're still hoping that Congress will pass additional information about how they should treat those funds. The formulas that I've seen so far are acreage, or it's land and population. So we win on land and we lose on population. If it was just based on land, it would be $100 million for Alaska. We get kind of adjusted down based on population and everybody else's public lands. So it probably won't be as much, but still it's still out there. And as soon as we learn more, we'll get it to you.
And as far as you know right now, it's going to be unrestricted, like somewhat like the ARPA funds.
That's I would imagine that it applies to general government services.
And another question, I know Fairbanks and Anchorage and some of the larger communities in Alaska are probably have a lot different priorities. What do you see in mid-sized communities like, the 2 to 10,000 population communities? What are they spending the money on?
Yeah, it run the gamut, but I think one, it's tailored to the community. I think that a lot of it is probably going to infrastructure, deferred maintenance, try to catch up on deferred maintenance and construction capital project budgets that kind of were put off for the last couple of years. That's where most, I think, are putting their funds. I think there's a few out there who do have different programs to support individuals in the community. Tribal governments also received a direct allocation of ARPA funds. And that's, I would say, more of tribal funds are going out to meet kind of community members' needs as direct allocations out to residents or other types of relief. But most local governments, most city and boroughs about that size are either going into deferred maintenance, construction, or some other combination of one-time programs that they need to have funded for the next year or two.
Thanks.
Anybody else have any questions for Nils? Well, thank you very much, Nils. I appreciate you helping us there.
Yeah, good luck.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
We're gonna need it.
Yeah.
Next up, we have Johnny Johnson and Katie Homeland. You have the floor.
Thanks, you guys. Katie, are you on now? Can't hear you.
You muted, Katie?
Okay. Well, I might go ahead and get started. If that's all right, Katie, with you, me head nod. Okay. So the community cafe, I appreciate that some of the Borough Assembly members were able to make it to that conversation. I know the focus of this is on the ARPA funds, and And so we have a very specific request for this, but of course, it's a 3-year time frame, and the solution to the childcare issues is long-term. I believe shared with you where just kind of the summary one pager that looked at the average income for a wage for the childcare worker. It looks at the cost of childcare at $15,000 per kiddo. And the request that was put in, goodness, in the fall of 2020 was purely tuition assistance for families, and that was the focus. But you know, from the last meeting we had, that community cafe that you know, the PMC staff were able to facilitate with the Share Coalition, really decided that we wanted to focus on staff as our top concern right now. If 81% turnover is significant, and with the ratio right now in the classroom because of COVID, you know, there's staffing shortages, and trying to retain staff is a big deal. So with that, thank you. I mean, I think folks can look at that again at their leisure if they haven't yet. But what I wanted to go ahead and go into then was the focus for these funds that we're requesting. And so early childhood educators, we know they're underpaid and overworked, and COVID has been exhausting. And there's recognition that early childhood educators are essential workers. They're hearing that. However, as professionals, they, you know, morale is low, and they're not getting recognized that they are trained and they're providing a safe place for kids and they're educating kids. So really, this funding request acknowledges that these professionals work hard to provide a safe space and educate our kids, not to mention let us go to work. And additionally, well, I've already mentioned that turnover rate. So the focus of this ask are on measures aimed at retention. So it's not the long-term answer, but we feel it's an important Band-Aid. And coming up with this, I need to back up a little bit. Sorry, you guys. So when we were discussing this, Good Beginnings, Kinderskog, Katie Homeland was there, and Julie Walker with the Medical Center was part of this conversation. Callie Caples, the new owner of Serendipity, now Mitkoff Monsters, was there. And we were also considering the After School Academy, which, you know, now has new ownership as well. So it was a collective conversation, you know, with the Share Coalition, kind of leading the way, just to make sure that you guys have that background, like where this came from. Okay, so one of the requests when we looked at this was, you know, dealt with wellness. And so a Parks and Rec annual pass for every childhood educator for the 3 years. And part of this comes from, one, mental health, but two, recognition by the borough for essential services provided by educators as they cope with the extra requirements associated with COVID-19. It was stated that acknowledgement by Borough Assembly will really make a difference to staff. And so, you know, when you look at the rate per year for an individual is $300 a year, and there are 25 employees. That includes the directors as well as the classroom staff. So that would be $22,500 for 3 years. And then the second one are the quality incentives. And this one, you guys, you know, we initially, I think a lot of us went to, wage increases, you know, based on education, wage increases, and we could increase wages. But then that realization sets in of that's pretty cruel. And to 3 years, you know, have a wage increase, and then at the end of 3 years, take it away. So this was an alternative to that recognizes people where they are at. And so we have a working model, which is the Juno Hart working model, but it doesn't quite fit what our Petersburg early childhood educator community looks like. So we would be developing that, but the idea here is to use the 3 years of funding for quality incentive programs. And so every 6 months, it would be money into the pocket of these educators. And we're hoping that it might have an effect in decreasing turnover. I mean, it's kind of nice. We have this baseline survey data that we could compare with, but it's tricky because there are other variables that come into play with turnover. And one of the big ones is the low wage, and we're not really affecting low wage. We're just trying to put more money into the pockets, as well as provide incentive if you do complete additional educational programs and receive additional credits, then you would get some additional funding. So let's see. So with this, we didn't necessarily go and figure out all of the details at this point in time, but we did come up with an average, and some would be under this, some would be over this, but roughly 2,000 a year, again, for the 25 employees, which would be 50,000 for the year or 150,000 for 3 years. So that puts the request at about $175,000. And of course, just thinking through this, goodness knows if we'll receive the funding, but working with Julie Walker and Becky Turlin, they talked to Phil, just trying to figure out who could administer this so that the borough wasn't having to work with multiple childcare providers. And indeed, the Petersburg Medical Center would be able to administer this program. And then, as always, that's the tip of the iceberg. So tuition assistance, I did want to touch on this, or I shouldn't say the Share Coalition, we wanted to touch on this since that was such a huge need in 2020. It hasn't gone away. It's just that I think Mitkoff Monsters has had a vehicle for taking care of a lot of their families. Kinder Scott Good Beginnings has received grant funding to help take care of families. The Petersburg Children's Center has received grant funding to take care of families. But June 30th for some of the programs, will be the end date. And there's still about $1,500 a month coming in requests. So I thought you guys would like to hear that. Or we, the collective we. Let's see. And then some other items that the Share Coalition really hopes we can keep these conversations going. And I'll just go through it really quickly. And that's just an economic impact of childcare. I believe that Dave mentioned that would be useful. And we agree that having more quantified data, both for making the case for supporting the childcare community, like 0 to 18, especially in that 0 to 5 that gets overlooked, as well as, for grants, that would be very helpful. Facilities, I don't know with utilities, if there's a creative way to provide some offsets in the utilities. It's such a razor thin profit margin for childcare providers. That any savings that comes on the facility side could then go into education, and then of course summer programming is a need. So there's tons to do, and we need always more resources, of course. So that last graphic, you guys, before I open it up and for questions, I just wanted to, if we could go down to the cost as a percentage of household income. I guess it will be very interesting to look at that, but I was kind of blown away when you look at the dual household incomes, the percentage that's there. Sorry, I minimized that just so I could see faces on there. But 14%, if you're a single male household, childcare is 30% of your income. And then if you're a single female household, childcare is 65% of your household income. So, but with that, thank you for your time, Katie. Hopefully that covered things that you might want to say too. Katie is a childcare provider, was going to elaborate much more on what they've been through, I guess is probably a good way to put it, as they continue to work really hard to provide quality programs and show lots of love and care for the kids. So questions?
Yes, thank you, Joni. Yeah, I appreciated your program that you had on Saturday. It was very informative. The one thing that really intrigued me was a summer program. What exactly would you want us to stand up, like if the borough stood up a program like we had at Parks and Rec years ago, or what exactly do you mean by that?
To be honest, I think I could chip away at it, but I think our strategy is to pull folks from the borough and from the medical center and from the providers together, because, I think that there's the Kinderskog, I believe, has some plans for summer programming, but really it is that who Parks and Rec, are they able to do that? What would it look like? But I think that the after school academy, I'm not sure if that's still what it's going to be called, with Fillmore as the administrator. I don't know, capacity to increase. One of the issues is that licensed space. So any type of increase, that's a huge obstacle. If you're not licensed by the state, you can't use the space. And then I'm also going to just repeat myself too. I'm not the expert on this, working with the Share Coalition and with these providers. So I'm going to put that plug in for, we need to have more conversations, and summer's going to be here before we know it too.
I can touch on that.
Oh, yay, Scott.
Katie, I'm back. Hi, this is Katie Homeland. I serve in multiple capacities through the community, but as the Kinderskog and Good Beginnings director, I can also speak on the summer programming a little bit, because I think we were one of the few programs offering summer programs outside of traditional childcare last year. I can tell you that my enrollment was completely filled in less than 10 hours last year. We got a lot of kids through our program. It was a lot of coordinating. It was awesome. We had a great time. But you can tell just by the fact that it took 10 hours for it to completely fill. It is a need. It absolutely is. And not just for our littles. We need some more enriching programs for our slightly older kids as well, to give them safe spaces to be, that are also enriching and fun and engaging. So I can kind of speak on that. I don't know if anyone has any other specific questions about the things Joni touched on, but I will say childcare is an amazing place to work. I'm very thankful for my job. It has been, I'm going to get emotional again. I can't get through a Zoom call about my job anymore. I think some of you saw the one-page flyer that I unfortunately am on my phone now, so I can't share my screen. $12.72 is our average hourly wage here in Petersburg for professionals who are caring for our children. And many of them, 30%, here I got the number, 30% have to rely on state or federal assistance programs. 52% have to obtain insurance through Medicare or Medicaid, and 52% get insurance through Medicaid, 30% have a second job. And these are the people that we're putting in charge of taking care of our like most amazing asset and valuable contributors to our future community. And we do it with a lot of love. We do it with a lot of passion, and we work our tails off to support our families, which Joni kind of touched on. Is between the child care programs here in Petersburg right now, the grant funding we've gotten, we've pushed towards our families to support them. And we do so very thankfully, and we're very grateful for the funding we've gotten. But the bar hasn't been raised for our staff, who have proven they are essential. We have proven that childcare is not a luxury and it should be a right. And yeah, I hope that our borough can appreciate the effort that we have all been putting in, have always been putting in, and will continue to put in, no matter where the cards may fall on this one. So I'm here also if you have any other questions. I'll stop talking for a little bit.
I think it's very helpful that we've identified that PMC could maybe be the administrator of something like that, because over the last several months or years, we've struggled with having either the borough do it or employees of the borough do it or the school do it. It's been a struggle. And I think by identifying PMC, we could use that as a common area to kind of, if it's just the borough supplying funds to the hospital, or, and the programs that you lined out, Joni, about the wellness passes up at Parks and Rec and the quality incentive programs. I think those are doable things within, in my mind. I'd like to talk more about them at the assembly one of these days, but yeah, I think those are very helpful things, good things to know. And, you've got a new owner up at Midcoff Monsters, and there's other things going on. So I think that's encouraging. So yeah, does anybody else have any questions? Yeah.
I got a ton of questions, but I don't know if this is the right forum to do them in. I guess what I'd be interested in are getting some more information. Like you mentioned in there, possible borough assistance on electrical rates. So I guess what I'd like to see is, if that's something you're talking about, is how much you're paying for electricity. The other one, where you mentioned property tax abatement. And maybe Jody can answer this one. I mean, they pay property tax, or they get or do they have to pay property tax because they're nonprofits on their property they have right now?
Well, I think most nonprofits are exempt from property taxes. I don't know. I mean, Good Beginnings is part of the church, so that's exempt. Children's Center, that's exempt.
Yeah, I would throw in that with this, we are thinking for, it's nonprofit and for profit, because Mitkoff Monsters leases their space. They pay. And I'm not sure what the arrangement at the Elks is, but anyways, but it's not only nonprofit that we're thinking about here, because
Sure.
yeah, that's it. Thanks.
I guess you have good numbers on the first part of the proposal. It's just on those last couple items that I want to have more information on. The one that has intrigued me and that I've heard a lot of feedback on is on the summer program. Is it a lack of space? I know it's always a lack of enough bodies to stand up a program like that. But I mean, the borough has quite a bit of space at Parks and Rec that's underutilized. I guess I'd like to hear some more comments on how you'd propose to stand a program up. I know if we talk to Stephanie, she's always screaming because she doesn't have enough staff to do what she's doing right now. And I can hear exactly what she would say if we suggested that. But, if we, it's something we could do right away and then maybe not cost a lot of money. If you could come up with a proposal on what that type of program would look like and how you'd propose it to operate and approximately how much you think it costs to do. That would help me a lot, at least on that last bullet. And I have heard comments from several people that, a lot of people, they don't use traditional childcare during the school year, with their younger kids, it creates a problem in the summertime. Where do you put a first through sixth grader? You don't want to leave them at home on their own with an older sibling all the time, and I know as a kid growing up where I grew up at, I my mom worked, my dad worked, and in the summer times, I spent most of my time at the YMCA. They had excellent programs, and it was very important in my early development. So it'd be great if we had something like that parents could resource here in the community. So I guess that's my question, if we could get more information.
I do think historically, several of those summer opportunities the Park and Rec put on and hosted, several of those like camps were actually contracted out. And so I think getting people in our town that are willing to take on the liability of being an independent contractor in that situation is tricky. People that have the time to put it all together. Staffing is an issue across the board right now. And speaking of my own program, our issue is the cap that we have to our license due to the square footage of our building. And we don't even step foot in it in the summertime. And that's still where we're restricted. So
let me ask a question.
Yeah.
What if you use Parks and Rec as your facility in the summertime for your licensing? Then I would assume you could have a lot more individuals, a lot more kids.
So that also includes a lot of extra paperwork, which not saying I'm not willing to do it. Approval from my boards and variance paperworks, because it would be a shared space and we have no control over the people that share that space. So obviously the folks that our children are potentially running into, we want a reasonable sense of safety, and we can't control that. We can't police that in a shared space as easily, especially someplace like our community center. It would be something worth looking more into. Definitely. But that's kind of where the holdup is. Like, all of our childcare centers are so bound by regulations through the state right now, which have their pros and cons at times. Yeah, a shared use agreement somewhere might be helpful for the overflow. For any program, not even just speaking of mine, because we know we have summer overflow. We have really long wait lists already.
Yeah. And I think I would just add, Dave, that there's like that immediate need of, what we could do this summer. And then thinking about it a bit more. Maybe it's not too late, but I think there are ways, if we can find the space that could be utilized by multiple childcare providers, and then perhaps, there are, between AmeriCorps and other programs, I think there are ways to get something that would work with Parks and Rec. I mean, I just say that as the logical place right now, but who knows? But it takes time, and it takes bringing people together to figure out, which direction or two directions we want to try and pursue to make it happen. But you're right, that near future this summer, it's probably a different planning effort, but one to bring us together, because I think we can find a solution, but we need more people than just childcare providers or just, Parks and Rec to tackle that one.
I've heard quite a few references to different state regulations preventing stuff from being able to change in a few ways. Do you know of any efforts at the state level to be amending any of those kinds of things? Is working with AML and doing statewide advocacy a possible path for systemic answers here? Or that might be outside of the conversation today, but do you know of any outside groups we could look into communicating with about their advocacy work or anything like that?
Thread Alaska is kind of our go-to Southeast advocacy network. I don't want to make it seem like I'm against regulations. Regulations are great because they help keep kids safe and staff protected. And just speaking of my own program here, Charlotte might want to jump on with her own. I run an outdoor program. The regulations don't fit. We are literally outside the box, and they have not caught up. And so we're not the only forest school in Alaska, but the other ones we haven't bound together to really advocate, because we've been so completely burdened by trying to keep our doors open and our buildings staffed, that advocating on a state level right now is kind of an overwhelming task for me personally anyway. Something that needs to happen for sure. And any assembly member is welcome to tag along to our preschool program or outdoor program anytime. If any of you feel so inclined to advocate on a bigger scale for us, the door in the forest is always open. We would welcome it.
Thank you very much for those presentations. Any other questions up here, or anybody in the audience have any questions? Okay, should we go with Erica? You're here.
Hang on one second, Jeff.
Oh yeah, sure, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, Charlotte, you just came on. Did you have something you wanted to add?
Yep.
Thanks, Jeff.
I know in the past that Parks and Rec does amazing work, like Katie was saying about contracting. it's really hard to be able to keep the Parks and Rec, the shared space idea is a great idea. We've thought about it in the past too. But for us and for Parks and Rec, they're too short staffed to be able to pull off any long-term programming. And although it would be great to get something started, I like Katie's idea about getting something more childcare related, because the community center, like she said, anybody and everybody from the Petersburg could use that space, and it's a lot harder for us to be able to regulate in and out of that space. We had the same kind of problem with whenever our Eagles Nest program rented from the school. We had to like have a shared space contract written up for the state licensor, and anytime that we changed classrooms or we did anything, we would have to get relicensed over and over and over again. And it's hard. It really is hard. It's doable, but it's hard. It takes a lot of legwork. And I, like Katie said, sorry, now I'm gonna get emotional. It takes a really big heart to be in childcare or any kind of caregiving capacity at all. It's often thankless, and it's the most rewarding position I have ever done outside of being a parent. And I don't plan to vacate my position, but also some of my staff are planning to vacate their position because they don't get the resources that they need, or the salary that they probably deserve. I know it's going to be a long-term issue, but I do think that even just talking about it is a step in the right direction. And I know that my staff would be extremely excited to hear that you guys are even discussing these issues at this point. So thank you. I know Katie and I am for sure always at the Children's Center, and between 7:30 and 5:30, more like actually 8 o'clock to 5:30. If you guys need anything or have any questions, or even wanted to stop by and take a gander at what we do all day, we're here and we're available. And we would be more than happy to show off what we do, because we do truly love what we do. And the more people that realize how important our jobs are, then I think the better off we will be as an industry, childcare and preschool and all of the things. So just thank you. If you have any questions for me outside of this realm, I'm more than open to sit and chat with anybody.
Yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Any questions? Okay. So I guess we'll move on to Phil and or Erica, whoever would like to go first. Sure.
Is
Mike's
Erica on?
Good, yeah.
Oh,
It is on site.
okay. Hey,
I don't like staying. I should have stayed online. So I guess I don't have like a big formal presentation today for you. It's more just a discussion, but I guess I really would like to piggyback off of this presentation. I was really looking forward to hearing it from the childcare professionals, because everything that they're describing and everything that is done to support 0 to 5 or 0 to 12 supports our mission. So I'm wholeheartedly in favor of whatever resources can be directed toward these programs and potentially towards sustaining them beyond, just this 1 or 2 or 3 years. I think that's also been the challenge for us at the school district. We have received ARP funds as well. We're working with that, and it's been challenging because we've, you don't want to put a bunch of things in place that you can't sustain. And I've been on calls with Nils off and on throughout the year as well. Just I'm kind of cautioning, where he kind of gives that cautionary piece. You don't want to get yourself locked into hiring 3 or 4 or 5 more teachers, or starting some big fabulous program and then not being able to sustain it after a certain number of years. So we have tried to focus efforts very intentionally on additional staff that we have hired that we know is very focused on addressing learning loss or keeping class sizes at a smaller number, and trying to keep it in that realm based on what is best for kind of COVID mitigation, and also what's best practice for instruction in general. for our class sizes and for attention to our students, especially after the disruptions that we've had over the last couple of years. So certainly we think we have put the money that we've received already toward that, and also that we've received through the borough through our request last year. Tried to be very responsible about that and put that mostly towards our people, or towards addressing whether it's technology needs that we can use to provide instruction virtually and in person. So we've had to make that shift, and we've put the money, in those directions. Honestly, right now, the biggest thing we're dealing with, and it's at the top, on the top 4 of your list, is our roof right now. So thinking about capital projects, and that's another way to put money in a place that clearly is hopefully a one-shot. Definitely a high need. It's been on the list for a while. It's been at the top of our list for several years. So, any creative ways there. We know we're probably looking for secure rural schools funding at some point here in the next, couple of years when we get an application hopefully approved. The state tends to look more favorably on projects that we pay for first, and then, we apply for the reimbursement, and we've had really good luck with that. So that process seems to be good. We know how to do it now. We've done several big projects with the remodel and working on the kitchen remodel and all those things too. So I would say that we're looking at sustainability like everybody else. If it goes into staffing or people, we need to know that we probably will see a sunset on that a couple of years down the road, knowing that hopefully we're moving out of this pandemic and kind of getting back to a little bit more of a normal look. So there's that, and then those capital pieces that could be more of a one shot. So any questions for me?
The roof. Currently the state, or at least the indication of the current state budget is they are going to start paying their share of, if we go to bond for something like that. How much money is it going to take to replace? Is it the roof on the high school and the middle school and the elementary school, all 3 of them?
Elementary is good.
Good, right, good.
That was one of our projects, and
Right.
Yeah, so we're good to go there, and it held up and did what it was supposed to do during all this insanity. So
it's basically the high school and middle school.
yep, it's the middle and high school.
And have you gotten any estimates yet, or are you at that point yet?
We are not specifically to the whole project. I believe we updated the approximate amount last year to, is it 4 million? I don't want to say the wrong number now. Sorry, I don't have it right in front of me. Definitely it had been on the list and was well undervalued for several years. So we had gone back to the drawings that we had from, they're not up to date. So we are working with our insurance, of course, right now after this most recent snow and ice events, and coming up with what that's going to look like. But those are patches. Those are temporary. It's not, they won't be replacing, the entire roof. So we are prepared to be moving forward with that process and getting those bids and getting a good appraisal of it, the whole project.
So $4 million sounds like you're nearly into the bonding range. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. That's very
Okay.
informative.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate you coming, Erica.
Oh, yeah. You
That's
bet.
great.
Thank you, guys.
Yep. Hey, Phil.
Hey, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, well, so what I thought I would do is just sort of cover some of the expenses we've had with COVID, just to give you an overview of the impact to the hospital and what we've been trying to do. Number one, our staffing and a lot of the things related to childcare, and what Erica is saying, we certainly feel those impacts quite a bit. So certainly a fantastic community cafe, and anything we can do to assist in that is something we'd be very interested in working with. Related to COVID and addressing this in the mitigation expenses, I have about 2 years worth of data or financials. I asked our CFO to analyze what we've actually spent on COVID and what we received from various agencies and grants and CARES Act and provider relief, and then just do some simple math and what we have for uncovered expenses. And so we have a budget roughly around $19 million annually. And that budget in the last couple of years, about a third of that has been with expenses towards COVID. So overall, COVID has cost PMC roughly an estimated amount of $11.1 million. We received in funding, and that includes the provider relief, PPP, loan forgiveness, FEMA, federal grants, other state grants, rural distribution grants, roughly about 9.6 million. And so PMC has spent with unreimbursable expenses of $1.5 million in the last 2 years. And really, from my standpoint and our staffing standpoint, we've basically tried to address it and look at whatever the community needed, we would try to provide, and whether that's staffing at meetings to make sure that we're focused on the latest protocols and testifying and having the latest mitigation process, or free testing, supplies, staffing well into the hours of the night to be able to run those lab tests on site, all the advocacy we've been doing. And so there's a lot of things that we haven't even captured in much of that. I know that there's some, good conversation here and looking at ways to invest in the community, and we certainly are very interested in that as well. But just to be aware that the cost of COVID is pretty substantial, and making sure that we've been addressing it ahead of when we would want to see people having admissions and severity and all the things that we've been able to do in the last couple of years. So I just wanted to give you an overview of that, just from a strictly financial standpoint, the cost and impact from PMC, and from what we've received minus what we spent. So that's pretty much all I had as far as a presentation. And I'm glad that there's some time to look at this funding and make sure that you have the opportunity to spend it, without sort of an urgency behind it. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Any questions for Phil? Yeah, go ahead.
I'm curious what kind of funding sources you're looking for in the future for COVID support. Are there state opportunities available to you? Are there more federal opportunities? Or is this ARPA funding just, this is it now?
I haven't even put in a request for the ARPA funding. I mean, I guess it's just the cost of doing business right now is, but there's not a lot out there as far as COVID mitigation. We have, we obviously know the airport contract is just is being terminated in later this week, the 31st or so is the end date of that, and we're going to continue that as much as we can. But we do not have funding sources going forward on that. Even the funding that we did get has been a scramble, and we've been it has not been easy obtaining that funding at all. We've been, we have not been sitting around receiving funding by any means. We've had to chase after every single thing. So from our standpoint, again, we'll do what we need to do. We might have to scale back on mitigation as it progresses if there's no funding available. But at the end of the day, we'll do what we need to do, but we'll make sure that everyone is aware if we have to scale back on some of our services, supplies. And I mean, I just found out today there's a supply issue with test tubes for blood. And, I was intending on doing a health fair with the community, and I just, realized that we don't have, it's such a national shortage that we can't get blood test tubes, which is pretty insane when you think about it. So there's a lot of things that we're going to have to be very just on top of it from a healthcare standpoint, supply issue, supply chain, and then funding as well.
Thank you, Phil. Tom or Bob, do you guys have any questions?
Yeah,
Andy or Liz? Oh, sorry.
oh, go ahead. Back to Phil again. One of the things we've talked about is we have an upcoming tourism season with cruise ships and so forth. Do you anticipate any kind of costs associated with having to go through that season with testing, et cetera? And I know we don't have any protocols or anything in place yet. But do you have any thoughts along those lines?
Yeah, I just don't know. You know, and that's part of that's the rub behind all this is we just, you know, we want to be, I think we want to be a little bit careful on what, you know, where this, what's going to happen with COVID. I mean, this could be, you know, the Omicron could be the turning point and things become endemic and then it becomes less of a need, or we will need to really double down on testing and scale it up. So it's really uncertain at this time.
Thank you.
Tom, did you have any questions?
Hey, yeah, no, I don't have any questions right now. Just want to thank everyone for coming out and especially Katie and Shirley is talking about the difficulties of you know, early age childcare in town. That really hit home. So thanks for sharing. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Tom. Sandy or Liz, anything? Else, anybody?
Are we on to the formal discussion period? Can we release our guests? Yeah.
We are.
While everyone's here, thank you for joining us. And this will be this is going to help us in further discussion. This is not the end of the conversation. So thank you everyone for joining us this evening. I guess I'll share my initial thoughts on all of this is I wish we could have, I miss certainty. I miss having budgets we could predict and things we could control. It's nice though for me to have the full spread of possibilities in front of us presented this way. I'm going to be wrestling a lot with the issue of the childcare funding and the immediate crisis needs of that industry in our town that is also so chronic that I worry about over-promising on something that would get taken away in 2 years, 3. I guess it'll all have to be spent, right, by 2026. So dedicated by 2024, but fully spent by 26. And so how we do that dance as decision makers is going to be challenging because I can feel the need in all these different aspects of the community, and how we manage that is going to be quite something. So it is great. It is really nice though to be having it all presented this way. I guess that's my initial thought. I'm interested in what anyone else has to say.
What?
Oh, yeah. No, I'm just, I keep going back to the word sustainability. It's great to stand up a couple programs, but we have to have a long-term solution to, for me, the childcare situation in town. When I say childcare, I'm not thinking of just the preschool kids, but just the whole childcare, the whole educational system in Petersburg, because that's what makes Petersburg a great place here, is raising children in this community. And one thing I've told people, that's probably tired of me saying it, that one thing the pandemic has taught me is how important the child care facilities are and the schools are to this community, because without them, our economy can't move. You see people going home to take care of their children during the day when these facilities are closed or the schools are closed. And yeah, we have to do something different or do something that we're not doing. And I think some of these incentives, the Parks and Rec Pass, just these electrical subsidies, that these are all things that we should be able to do. Working with the hospital, the school, I think we have the brain power to do this kind of stuff. And yeah, we might not solve all the problems here, but I think we can kind of agree that there's a problem here, and I think we can chip away at it. And I'm encouraged. And honestly, I thank everybody who showed up. I know it's in the middle of a Monday, and I know we have enough meetings, but work sessions are very important to me. It gives us a chance to kind of flesh out something and bounce stuff around. So I just thank everybody who was here. Dave, you have anything?
Yeah, no, I learned a lot, particularly about the school roof. No, I think it's good that we do this in a less formal setting than the assembly meeting occasionally, so at least issues can be brought and put on our radar screen, because we, like you guys, we only have so much time and so much bandwidth to absorb stuff. I like what Nell said, where a lot of municipalities were specifically trying to do capital projects, because you buy it, it's there. It's not something, well, if you buy a new fire truck, of course you have to maintain it. If you buy any sort of piece of equipment, you have to take care of it. So there's always continuing costs even on capital purchases. But I really think that the childcare component that was presented and what I heard at the community cafe, I know how important it is to have good childcare in this community. If we don't have it, we got a whole portion of our workforce that's not going to show up. And we don't have a lot of people now that are engaged in the workforce, because my gosh, I can't imagine if you had 2 kids having to spend $30,000 a year just to have them in daycare. It makes it to the point where you can't afford to be in the workforce nearly, unless you're making a lot of money. So if there's something that we can do with this very limited amount of money that we have on a short period of time, I'd really like to look at it. That said, my concern is that we don't stand something up that we can't continue into the future. And that's my concern. But I think there's some great ideas here, and I'm excited to take a look at them. As we go through the budget process, and Jody, boy, correct me if I'm wrong, which I am a lot of times. So I'll just go ahead and say it. It appears that right now the borough, we had issues with COVID, as providing government services and stuff, but we came out speaking as a borough a little bit better shape than I think a lot of the other entities in town. So I'm not opposed to using some of this money to some of the other entities in town, but we have time. We're at the start of the budget process. School, you guys are starting your budget process as well, and we'll see where this all stands. And although I wouldn't mind pushing some of this out the door as soon as possible if we can reach any sort of consensus on it. Seems like we have about $50 million worth of needs and $600,000.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate everybody's time. Thank you very much, and have a good evening. Drive safe. Yep. Thank you, Erica.
Thanks.
Thanks, Sandy.